Well, hello, Providence Financial friends and family. Thank you for joining us for our quarterly Friends and Family Questions and Answers webinar. For those of you that are friends, maybe have been invited by someone, I'm Anthony Sicaro. I'm founder and president of Providence Financial and Insurance Services Incorporated, located in Woodland Hills, California. I'm also a host of the Providence Financial Retirement Show that airs every Saturday and Sunday morning on KNX AM 1070. And I'm also an estate planning attorney here in the lovely state of California. And every quarter-ish, I like to do a webinar in which we can answer your questions. And you guys submitted a lot of questions that I'm going to take some time and answer. I think we got 25 to 30 questions somewhere in there. A lot of them were the same. So I condensed some of them down to really just make them a little more readable. And some of them I kind of just left as is. And some of them I wasn't even quite sure what was being asked. So we're just going to ask them and we're going to answer them. And we're going to have a lot of fun in the process as well. And for those of you that might have been invited here by someone else, or maybe you've been around Providence Financial for a long time, but have never just taken that leap to talk to one of our advisors, then we're going to offer you the ability to schedule a 30-minute call when we're done. So if you want to schedule that based on what you hear, have more questions, we'll give you the opportunity to schedule a 30-minute call with one of our advisors to get any questions answered that maybe I didn't get a chance to answer here, or clarify some of the answers that I did give you. Quick update on things. I did 2 live TV interviews today, and they always want to know about the state of the market, ask me some questions. The first interview was a macroeconomic interview about what's going on in the economy, and the second interview had specifically to do with the JOLTS report. What's that? That's the jobs report, essentially. The job openings, labor turnover report is what JOLTS stands for. And in a nutshell, we're waiting for the Federal Reserve to make the announcement tomorrow. It's widely expected that they're going to lower interest rates. I kind of expected across the board. But then the question is, what's going to happen next year? And what does all this mean for you? Well, in short, because I do want to get to your questions, in short, there's not a lot of major problems that we see for the stock market. GDP is probably going to come in at 2% this year. That's what the forecasts are. Next year, it's going to be a lot lower. But does that mean that it's going to have an impact on the market? Don't know. No one ever knows. But the biggest concern right now that I think we could have when it comes to the market, something that I mentioned earlier on, I think it was One America News Network, is the labor market right now. For the last couple of years, it's been an employee's job market. When I was reporting a couple of years ago, there were roughly 2 jobs available for every worker. What that means is if a worker didn't like their job, they could quit and easily go find another job. And there was 2 to 1. So that meant that employers like me had to give larger raises to keep good people, or we might have had to pay more to be able to attract someone that we wanted to have at our company. And I gave a lot of raises in the last couple of years because it's extremely expensive to replace someone. And from a mathematical business standpoint, it makes more sense to give a raise to keep a good person than it does to try to go hire someone else, let them, let a good person go to another company for an extra $1 or $2 an hour, and then try to replace that person. So, all of our team members are making really good money. What the impact of that, though, is inflation that's sticky. And the Federal Reserve has to keep inflation under control, and they've got to keep unemployment under control. And inflation has ticked down, but it's been stuck in that like high 2s, low 3s, depending on what you look at. The PCE report came in Friday at 2.8. CPI was at, I think, 3.2, which we didn't have because of the government shutdown, but that was the last reading that we had. But the bottom line is this. Around 3% inflation. They want it to be around 2%. It's stuck around 3%. Why? Because of this wage inflation that I just talked about. Good companies had to pay their workers more. They had to increase the wages more to keep them. That's a sticky inflation. Imagine if I were to try to go back to my employees, now that the labor market has settled down and now there's only 1 job available for every worker. It's much more tame. It's much more muted. Employees aren't feeling as cocky as they were a couple of years ago. The quits rate, which is how many employees are quitting and going to another company, that's way down. But imagine if I were to go to my workers and say, hey, guys, when I gave you that raise a couple of years ago because the labor market was off the charts and I had no choice, I wanted to keep you and you're a good worker, I'm taking that back. It doesn't work like that, right? So that's sticky. I can't take it back. That's something that is always going to be there. And and it's always going to be priced in. And the Federal Reserve has to fight that, and their job is to try to get inflation down. So it's heading towards that 2%. It's not there. It's not close, but it's a whole lot closer than it was a couple of years ago. With regards to the biggest concern I think we have is the job market in the labor markets. And really what I mean by that is 70% of the United States GDP is driven by consumers. And as goes the consumers, as goes the economy, as it's been often said. And if the consumer starts to crack and feel like they're not going to spend money, that's what could be problematic to us going forward, to the economy going forward. And we're starting to see cracks in the consumers' hardware. The debt ratio is climbing, getting back up towards record levels. The delinquencies rate is climbing. Savings are going down. The job openings are muted, and the quits ratio, I said, is down. People aren't feeling confident that they can go get another job. That means they're staying where they are. Year over year wages is down a little bit. So the problem is that we're starting to see these cracks in the consumer, and it could be that when these cracks show up, then in fact that could trickle down in a big way to the stock market. If consumers quit spending money, revenues for corporations goes down. If revenue goes down, profit goes down. If profit goes down, stock price goes down, and it could be that snowball. Now you throw into the fact that you've got AI, right? And AI, a lot of people are worried about AI taking over jobs. I don't think it's going to take over jobs. I mean, don't get me wrong. Don't take me the wrong way. It will take over jobs, but jobs are going to transform. And this has always been the way that the economy has always worked. There's always been progress. There's always been technological improvement. There was a time that we didn't have cars, right? And there was a time that we had horses, and then horses went to cars. And it's not that the people lost their jobs; it's people had to then learn new skills. And then there were a time where we had to do accounting by paper and pencil and hand, right? And no calculators. And then that came, and now all of a sudden we've got computers. So it's going to transform. The difference this time is the speed of which this transformation is happening is going to leave a lot of unskilled workers unemployed and unemployable. And a lot of companies are laying off people now because of the fact that they're putting that money into employees. It's the biggest expense companies have. And by laying off workers, they're putting that expense into research and development for AI. And you might have heard this AI bubble, right? Is it really a bubble? I heard a good conversation today that I agreed with the individual, and he basically said, yes, there's a bubble brewing, and it seems to be brewing. Excuse me, I'm talking all day. It seems to be brewing, but he's not concerned about the bubble popping next year or the year after. He was talking 2027, 2028. I agree with that. I don't think that we're talking about a bubble that's going to burst overnight. But I do think that there is a bubble that is potentially forming. What's the result of that? I don't know. I just know that bubbles aren't generally good. But here's what I do know. If you were at our client appreciation event, we had a casino theme. It was a great night. It was, 3 weeks ago, a month ago. Time goes by so fast. By the way, speaking of time, Merry Christmas. Hard to believe we're 2 weeks away from Christmas, right? But we had this client appreciation event, and it was a great time. And I spent some time talking with them. And the one thing that I spent talking about that I'm going to share with you is why are clients attracted to Providence Financial? It's for the peace of mind that they get. Here's the deal. You don't get peace of mind by knowing that you're selling off assets to get the income you need. If you're having to cannibalize your portfolio and you're in a race against time, you can't possibly have the peace of mind of knowing that there's an end date to your portfolio. That's the problem. When you have income that you have coming in year after year after year without touching your principal, then you can have the peace of mind and the freedom to be able to spend that income without any impact on your portfolio. And what studies have shown is that people with pensions are these guaranteed lifetime incomes. With people with pensions have happier retirements and more fulfilling retirements than people without pensions. Why? Because it's all about income. You don't retire on assets, you retire on income. Just today, I'll share a story with you, and then we're going to get to our questions. Just today, I met with clients, and I'm not sure if you guys are here or not, but if you are, the story is going to sound familiar because this was you. Without naming names, I met with clients at $3.6 million. That's the amount they have. They need about $125,000 a year out of their portfolio. Currently, from their current portfolio, fully invested for growth. And by the way, I'm going to say that these are almost clients. They're brand new clients. We haven't done anything with them yet. This is where they came to us from at this point. Right now, they have $3.6 million fully aggressively invested for growth. It's all stocks. The entire portfolio is all stocks. Currently, the income he's getting from his portfolio is he's getting somewhere around $35,000 a year of net income. $35,000 a year is like 1%. That's what he could get. If he wanted to spend $35,000 a year, he could do it and not touch his portfolio at all, not touch his principal at all, just live off the dividends. On the other hand, he needs $125,000 a year. If $35,000 of it is coming from the dividends and interest on the portfolio, primarily dividends, he's $90,000 short. He's going to have to cannibalize $90,000 a year, every single year, to get the $125,000 that he needs for his retirement. This is his situation. Now, if you cannibalize $90,000 this year, next year you have 90,000 shares left. The following year, 90,000 shares left. The following year, $90,000 worth of shares left. And you're cannibalizing this and the portfolio. And if you live long enough and you keep cannibalizing your portfolio, what's the danger? Yeah, the danger is running out of money before you run out of life. That's the issue. What's the alternative? $3.6 million at 5% a year in something that's very consistent is $180,000 a year of income, interest and dividends that you can live off of without ever touching principal. $180,000 a year. That means that he can get his $125,000 a year and still have another, $55,000 a year to reinvest, to adjust for inflation. That you got to, I almost hope you're not on here now, but you got to be nuts not to want to do that, quite frankly, because it just makes sense. And when you have that $180,000 a year coming in every single year, you can feel free to spend it without ever touching principal. And it's the peace of mind, the confidence that you're going to get from that. That's what retirement's about. What good is retirement if you're always having to look over your shoulder and I hope the market doesn't crash next year and I hope it doesn't crash the year after? And you know, what good is that? Go live your retirements. You don't retire on assets, you retire on income. And that's what we do at Providence Financial, is help you get the income. Why? So you can have the confidence and clarity and the stress-free and peaceful retirement you deserve. That's what we do at Providence. Okay, I'm off my high horse. Thank you for giving me 15 minutes to warm up. Let's answer your questions. We have a lot of you on here too, as a matter of fact. We had over 100 people register for this. So where do we start? So we had a question about the new tax benefit, and it was just a broad question. I think the question was, I wrote down new tax benefits in 2025 and beyond. So let me just touch on some of the tax benefits that you may not be aware of. First of all, are you aware of the senior deduction? If you're over 65 years old, you have a standard deduction. Right now, standard deduction is just a hair over $30,000 per couple. So half of that, $15,000 per person. If you're married, $30,000. And if you're over 65, there's an automatic $6,000 deduction on top of that. That's another $12,000 per couple. That's that's $42,000 of standard deduction that you could get without paying a dime of tax. The first $42,000 is tax-free. It's a deduction. That's what a deduction is. That gives many of you a huge opportunity to do something with it. I don't know what. Could be Roth conversions, could be buying long-term care insurance, could be, there's a lot of things that it could be. But that's a huge deduction. Let me put that another way. You don't leave, if you're over 65 and you're married filing joint, your taxable income is $100,000 before you have to leave the 12% tax bracket on the federal. We have state of California to deal with. But from a federal side, it's right around $100,000 of income, of taxable income, where your taxable income is your adjusted gross income minus the deduction. In this situation, if you're over 65, your income, adjusted gross income could be $142,000. And because you have $42,000 deduction, you never leave the 12% tax bracket. A lot of you are making half of that. You might be making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year. If you're making $100,000 a year and the first $42,000 doesn't count, you're only paying tax on like maybe $60,000 a year. you could take out another $40,000 a year and never leave the 12% bracket. That, my friends, is Roth conversion material. What if you could convert your IRA into a Roth IRA and not pay more than 12% tax plus a few percent on the state? That makes a lot of sense. That's a deduction a lot of you, I think, don't know about. It's called the $6,000 senior deduction per qualifying spouse. Got to be over 65. What else? A couple things that I think were interesting. Probably not going to affect those of you unless you were working. There's no tax deduction on, there's now a tax deduction on overtime pay. So if you make overtime, you don't get taxed on that overtime. So that's kind of cool. There's a new deduction on car loan interest. There's some rules. By the way, with all of these, there's some rules that you need to know. I'm not getting in the nitty-gritty rules, but if you buy a new car, I think that's one of the rules. You can actually deduct the interest to some degree. No tax on tips if you're still working. Something else that's interesting. Here's a big one. This one's going to affect a lot of you, especially if you're a government worker or a teacher. And that is that the windfall elimination provision went away and the government offset provision went away. Those were the two provisions that really would penalize you if you had paid into tax before, but you were a teacher and then they would take away part of your Social Security. If you were a government worker and you had a pension, they would take away part of your Social Security. I never liked it. Trump didn't like it. He got rid of it. So that was brand new as of January of this year, I think. And you don't have to do anything. If you qualified for that, I think it was March or April, you should have seen a much higher Social Security check. They back paid you all the way to 2024, and you should be getting a much higher Social Security check now because the windfall elimination provision and the government offset provision are no longer in effect. So thumbs up there. Something else you might not have known of. The federal state tax, $15 million now. So it was a higher, they raised it up a little bit. It's not going to affect a lot of you. It just simply means that the first $15 million is not taxable from a federal state tax standpoint. And if you're married, you can set it up to where you get that times two. So the first $30 million. We won't get into it. Not going to affect a lot of you. What else? And then the other one, this is a good one too. This is one that will affect most of you. And that is the SALT tax, the state and local income tax. SALT, state and local tax, the deduction was $10,000 before, meaning that you could only deduct state and local tax up to $10,000. Now you can deduct up to $40,000. That is monstrous. That's huge. So you're going to see that on this year's tax return as well, too. Now, it is income dependent. You can make too much money. And if you make too much money, then you won't see it. But these are things that your accountant should be aware of, or you should be aware of as well. So we have 18 more questions to go. That's question number one. I'd like to see if we can get this quick, but I also want to answer your questions. So let's see. So this is interesting. Some of these questions are going to be very easy. So the question had to do with, has the industry tried to promote financial advisor fees as deductible? So can you deduct advisory fees? The answer is no. You used to be able to, but one of the flip sides of the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is that you can't deduct advisor fees anymore. But the reality is there is something else that most of you probably have never thought about, and that is fees with regards to your IRA. When you pay the fees to your advisor, whether it's us or whether it's another advisor, and those fees get deducted from your IRA, they don't count as income for you. They stay off your tax return. So they're probably not huge, but they don't count as income. And you probably never thought about that before, right? If you have an IRA, if you're under 59 and a half and you make a withdrawal from your IRA, you're going to be penalized and taxed on that amount. But if you're under 59 and a half and you're a client of ours and we're deducting our fees from your IRA account, then it doesn't count as a withdrawal. It comes out of your IRA. So it's just a little something that you probably hadn't thought about. Big deal? Yeah, probably not. But you guys asked the question, so I wanted to give you the best answer I could. Unfortunately, fees aren't deductible, but you can pay the fees out of an IRA. What else? So this was an interesting question. Why does there have to be a separation between financial advisors and tax accountants? So, and I don't know. I had someone put these questions together for me. So quite frankly, I apologize. I'm not sure who asked these questions. But they're two different specialties. They're two different. They're both in the finance world, but they're two completely different industries. Tax professionals deal with tax returns. Financial professionals deal with financial. We've tried to put everything on umbrella. And some of you, where we can handle it all kind of as one. That's one of the reasons I became an estate planning attorney, because I've always felt like, what good is it if you work, you save, you you then put yourself in a position to get income from your portfolio. You have a happy retirement, and then you pass away and you leave a big mess. I mean, that's just doesn't make sense. No financial plan is good unless you have an estate plan. And it's such a passion to me that I went out and became an attorney to do this. And also I did the same thing with taxes. Some of you who've been around for a while might remember that I owned a tax firm for 9 years. I started it, we built it up for 9 years. And what it really did is it took away our core focus of helping you get income. So I wound up selling the practice. So I'm pretty familiar with taxes rather. And when we take you on as a client, or if you are a client, we've certainly helped you with your taxes for those of you that it's applicable for. And we have the connections, we have people that we work with if in fact we need to get a little more detailed. We have the ability to help you with that. But they're two totally different specialties. And I think that's important to understand. I should also bring up the fact that advisors are also subspecialized as well too. In the world of medicine, that, right? That there's general practitioners and then there's specialists, right? The specialists are the oncologists, the cardiologists, the rheumatologists, and so on. There's a specialist. But in the world of financial advisors, you tend to lump us as like all one thing. And the reality is that's not really the case. There are advisors that only specialize in advising mutual funds. There are advisors that only deal with IRAs. There are advisors, quote unquote advisors, that only sell annuities. That's all they do. And then there are advisors, most advisors specialize in growth. And then there are advisors that are in the niche area of income, like we are at Providence Financial. And the skill set among all these advisors is much different. The skill set for helping you get interest and dividends off your portfolio and not cannibalize your principal is much different than the skill set that you need to analyze stocks and have a growth-oriented portfolio. And everyone has its place, but just like there's different skill sets and specialties between advisors and tax accountants, there's also a subset of specialties in the world of advisors as well too. So hopefully that makes sense. What else? What other question do we have here? So what is the best strategy for reinvesting IRA RMDs that are creating a bank account surplus? Okay, so this was an interesting question. It sounds to me like what was being asked is I'm taking my RMDs. I don't need it. So it's going into the bank, building up my bank account. What else can I do with it? So first off, my favorite answer, spend it. Why are you letting it build up in the bank account? The reason most people let it build up in the bank account is because they're taking the required minimum distributions. They know intuitively that they're cannibalizing their principal to do that. And therefore, they don't want to run out of money. So they don't spend it. They're afraid to spend it. So what do? They put it in the bank and now they feel safe. They pay the taxes. They would never have taken it out if they didn't have to, but the stupid government forces you to take it out. So you got to take it out, but I'm not going to spend it. I'm going to put it over here where it's nice and safe. And the challenge is most of the times that's done, it's because there's a little bit of fear going on. We're afraid to spend it. And if you're cannibalizing your principal, then you're going to be afraid to spend it. If every time you take another trip, every time you take another RMD, every time you give more to charity, every time you give more to grandkids, every time you want to go out to dinner, if all of that stuff, every time you want to do something, you have to cannibalize more principal, what are you going to stop doing? You're going to stop doing all the stuff that you'd like to do because you're afraid to run out of money. You don't know. But on the other hand, if you're getting your required minimum distribution from interest and dividends, you can spend it and have no impact on your principal. The government doesn't care whether you have to sell principal or not to satisfy your RMDs. They don't care whether you have to cannibalize your portfolio, or they don't care whether or not you satisfy your RMDs from interest and dividends. They don't care, but you should. So a big part of the reason why people don't spend their RMDs is because they're just afraid to. They're afraid to. Now, that being said, let me answer the question. If you're not afraid to, and you just have extra RMDs or extra income that you don't know what to do with RMDs, what can you do with it? What are some things to think? Well, I wrote some things down. The general answer, it depends on what the purpose of your money is. Because if the purpose of your money is to get income, then we just talked about that. If the purpose of your money, though, is to leave a legacy, then there are some things that you could do. And if you're not spending your money, then what else is the purpose of the money? So let's think about it this way. Qualified charitable distributions. If you are charitable minded, you could give your required minimum distribution to a charity and have it stay off your tax return. This is one of the biggest mistakes that we see people make. They get their RMD, they put it in their checking account, and they write a check to charity. Maybe it's the full RMD, maybe it's just partial of the RMD. But when you do it that way, when you take your RMD, put it in your bank account, and write a check to charity, it becomes a Schedule A deduction. And unless you have a lot of deductions, remember, you have $42,000 of standard deduction. So you have to have more than $42,000 of deductions in order for you to get a write-off for this charity that you think you're giving to and getting a write-off at the same time. You may not be getting a write-off at all. You may not be getting a write-off because there's such a high standard deduction. But even if you do get a write-off, it's never dollar for dollar. There's a lot of negative impacts for having your RMD go into your bank account, because that income is going to show up on the front of your tax return, and on a second page of your tax return, it's going to come off. But because it shows up on your tax return at all, it might have an impact on your IRMA, Medicare Part B. We get a question about that later. We'll talk about that. It might have an impact on your Social Security tax. It might put you into another tax bracket. There is a lot of ramifications for having it show up on your tax return to begin with. So how do we solve that? Well, if you're going to give money to charity anyway, do one thing. Call the charity. Tell them you want, I'm sorry, not the charity. Call your custodian. Tell them to make the check for your RMD or some portion thereof to the charity. They will pay the charity gladly, and the charity will thank you for it, and it stays off your tax return. Off the tax return. It doesn't show up on the tax return. Stays off, and it satisfies your RMD, and it's not all or nothing. So if you have money that is building up in your bank account, and you're charitable minded, so maybe it's building up in your bank account, but then you're writing a check to charity from another source. No, don't do that. You're paying too much taxes. There's negative ramifications for that. So that's something you could do. Something else. What else? A tax deferred annuity. A lot of you have annuities. Annuities are tax deferred. If you take your RMD, I don't know, it doesn't matter the amount really, but if you take your RMD and you throw it in a checking account, you're not earning a lot of interest. But whatever interest you are earning, you have to pay tax on. So if you find maybe a high yield money market that's maybe paying you 3 or 4%, you got to pay tax on that 3 or 4% every single year, even if you don't need it, which sounds like the question. If you take that same money, your RMD, and you put it into an annuity and you earn 5 or 6 or 7%, because that's what you can earn on annuities these days, 5, 6, 7%, just as safe as the bank, just as safe as the money market. Well, it's tax deferred. What that means is that you don't pay tax on that amount until you make a withdrawal. Now you can control when you pay the tax on it. So that's something that if you're looking for a tax break, you'll earn more interest, your money will be just as safe, and you'll save a lot in taxes as well too. So that could be an idea. What's another idea? You could use that money that's going into your bank account to buy long-term care insurance. If you don't need it, the question I would have for you is, do you have your long-term care insurance protected? There's something called asset-backed long-term care insurance. I don't want to turn this into a long-term care insurance webinar. That's not what this is, but I wrote about this in my book. And it's not traditional long-term care insurance. Traditional long-term care insurance is insurance that's use it or lose it. It's very expensive. They can change the premiums. Lots of reason I don't like traditional long-term care insurance. I've never recommended it. I can't say never. 25 years ago when I got into the industry, that's kind of how I started. But as soon as I learned how it worked, I quit recommending it, quite frankly. But it's evolved. And it's turned into something where what's called asset-backed long-term care, where you can take a chunk of money, buy a life insurance policy with it, get a really significant long-term care benefit that comes along for the ride at really inexpensive premiums annually or nothing annually. It might just be you take $100,000 or $200,000 and shift it over to the insurance company and never have to make another payment again. And if you have long-term care, if you need long-term care, you or your spouse have a long-term care event, and you need long-term care, then in reality, the benefits are pretty phenomenal. They pay a lot more than you would almost expect. Pretty good long-term care benefits, and for an unlimited period of time. And if you never need long-term care, right? And you pass away in your sleep one night, like we all want to do, then there's a life insurance death benefit that goes tax-free to your beneficiaries. So either way, you're going to use it. It's just a matter of repositioning some money. And it could be 100,000, could be 200,000, could be more, could be less. 100 or 200,000, very common numbers for individuals that we've done with this. So if you have an RMD if you got to take the RMD, it's filling up your bank account. You don't know what to do with it. You got to pay the taxes. Then you got some left over. These are some ideas. Maybe you give it to charity through QCD. Maybe you set up an annuity that you don't have to pay taxes on. Maybe use it for asset-backed long-term care insurance. My favorite, still spend it as well too. So, so let's see. Let's answer a couple of questions about Social Security. So let's see, compound question. Can I take Social Security still? Can I take Social Security while still working part-time? Is there anything I need to know about this? If you choose to wait, do you really get more? So I'm going to guess whoever asked this question is on the verge of taking Social Security. And a lot of good questions, a lot of smart questions. You'd be surprised how many times people will come to me, ask me a question about something they did when something they did was wrong, and now they can't undo it. So hopefully you haven't done this. It looks like you're in the beginning stages. So let me give you some things to think about. And because a lot of you on here don't have questions about Social Security, we're going to be in and out very quickly. First of all, the Social Security question about working is, yes, if you are under full retirement age, which for most of you is going to be 67. For all of you, it's going to be somewhere between 66 and 67 years old. But where we are right now, most of you, it's going to be 67 years old. If you're under your full retirement age and you're still working, then you're allowed to make up to $23,400 and have no impact on your Social Security if you're taking Social Security. But if you're taking Social Security and you make more than $23,400, for every $2 you make over that amount, Social Security is going to want $1 back. That can be expensive. So let's say that you make $20,000 too much. Well, you're going to have to pay $10,000 of your Social Security back. And the trap to this is that, I was talking with someone recently about this, and they basically said, well, I'll just have them deduct it from my Social Security. They needed the money really bad. They were working. They needed the extra amount of Social Security. And they said, I'll just have Social Security deduct that amount. No, it doesn't work like that, because Social Security doesn't know when they're giving you Social Security, whether you're working or not. They don't know how much income you're going to make. They don't know. When they're going to find that out, and when you're going to find that out, is next year when you go to do your taxes and you realize you made $20,000 too much. Now, on top of whatever tax you have to pay, you're going to have to write a check for $10,000 to Social Security as a back payment. So not a good scenario, especially if you don't know about it. And if you don't know about it and you haven't planned for it, then it's going to make tax day a little less fun than it usually is. Now, in all fairness, it's not really a penalty. You're going to write a check for $10,000 back to Social Security, and they're going to recalculate your Social Security with that amount in mind. So it's going to be recalculated. But the fact is, it's certainly going to feel like a penalty when you go to write that check. So don't get caught in that trap. So the second part of this question then is, is there really a difference in waiting? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Now, I'm not going to take time to talk about the exceptions. Should you take it early? Should you wait? If you're going to pin me into the corner and force me to say what's better, generally across the board, what's better? Generally, waiting is better. But there's a lot of exceptions. And again, I'm not going to get into the exceptions because this is also not a Social Security webinar. And we do Social Security webinars, and you could attend one of those. As a matter of fact, if you go to providencefinancialinc.com, our homepage, there's an event section that tells you what all the webinars we have coming up. And if you have a question about Social Security or RMDs, we do webinars on those topics, I think every Thursday right now. You could go to the events page, find the Social Security webinar, attend that. I spend 45 minutes getting in the weeds with all just nothing but Social Security. But I do want to give you a number. I do want to tell you what we always say, it's generally worth waiting. Let me give you the number. Someone who would normally get $4,000 at full retirement age, if they claim it as early as 62, which is the earliest you can claim it unless you're a widow or widower. Okay, so if you would get, 67, if you would get $4,000, but you claim it at 62, you'll only get $2,800 a month. But if you wait till 70, you'll get $6,400 a month. I mean, you'll get almost like 3 times what you would get at 62 by waiting until 70. What that does is that also has a terrific compounding effect when it comes to your cost of living adjustments. The average cost of living adjustment is like 2.7%. on Social Security over time. And if you wait till 70, you start getting a larger amount. 2.7% of a larger amount is a larger amount. And if you start to extrapolate the numbers and you live to like 90 years old, and you started taking Social Security at 62 versus 62 versus 70, and you look out at 90 years old, oh my gosh, the numbers are drastic. Yeah, it's usually better to wait. And I think the last thing I'll throw in before we move on is that the race is the 80. It's right around 80. So what I mean is that whether you take it at 62 or whether you take it at 70, at 80, you get the same amount. It catches up to each other. Once you get beyond 80, it becomes much, much more advantageous to wait until 70 years old. So hopefully that helps answer the question. Let's move on. Let's see. So this one, I don't know if this was more of a vamping. What's that word called? Vamping? Rant. More of a rant. Here's what it said. RMD forever, like exclamation point. Diminishes payout of income from IRAs and tax. What's the point? So I'm not sure what you might think. You're irritated that you got to pay tax on RMDs, and they think eventually it means your RMDs are going to run out. Why do RMDs exist? The government wants their tax dollars. That's the bottom line as far as why RMDs exist. Now, an interesting point about RMDs is that they never run out. It's always recalculated every year. So even if you're 100 years old, I think your RMD is calculated to be something like 2 years left. So now you got to take like 50% of your IRA. So that's a lot. And then when you're 101, I think you got to take like another 50%. So it's never going to run out, but you do have to take a lot. In general, your RMDs are going to increase over time. At 73 years old, your percentage is 3.6%. That's the amount you have to take. When you get into early 80s, it's like 5%. You cross over 5%. When you get into early 90s, you cross over 10%. So the amount that you have to take significantly increases over time as well, too. And you have to plan for that as well. Let's move on. So question about IRMA. So how do I work around the monster IRMA increase in Medicare if I retire? The cost will rival my COBRA cost if I keep my company's healthcare plan. So great question. I'm going to have some good news for you. But before we talk about IRMA, or before we answer the question, what is IRMA? Well, IRMA is the income-related monthly adjustment amount that uses your modified adjusted gross income to determine what your Medicare Part B premium is going to be. If you're married filing joint and that modified adjusted gross income is less than $212,000, then you're at the minimum. It's $185 per month per person per Medicare Part B recipient. If you are over $750,000 a year of income, if you're married filing joint, that number jumps up to $629 a month. So it's all based on the IRMA. The IRMA looks back 2 years. Your Medicare Part B premiums today are going to be based on what your IRMA was 2 years ago. And that's going to determine what you're going to pay today. And then 2 years, if your income is lower, then your IRMA will drop as well too. So here's the good news for you. If you retire and all of a sudden, you lose a big amount of income and now you're going to file for Medicare Part B, as you probably would do if you're over 65 when you retire. Now you have this big IRMA, right? And that's your question. How do we get rid of it? Well, there's a form. Write this form down. It's SSA 44, SSA-44. IRMA, Social Security will actually allow you to file this form for a life-changing event. So if you have a divorce, death of a spouse, if you lose a pension income, loss of rental property income due to circumstances outside of your control, retirement, it's an exception. If you retire and you lose that income, you can fill out this form, and IRMA then will give you the opportunity to evaluate your situation and lower you to what your income will be, and base your Medicare Part B premium on today's income. Very big answer. Most of you didn't know that. And I'm sure the person answering this question is probably jumping up and down for joy at this point. I'm going to guess you didn't know that. So great question. Thank you very much. Very practical. A lot of you, it's not going to impact, but we are going to move on as well too. There's a lot to this retirement thing. It's expensive. I've often said it's the most expensive purchase that you're going to make, and we're just touching the tip of the iceberg. And I have no problem coming up. I've been doing my radio show now for 12 years or 13 years or something week after week after week, I have no problem coming up with material. I mean, there's just a lot there, and it's just any one mistake can throw you off, can, mess up your entire retirement. Next question. So I'll read the question again. I just copied and pasted this one. Should RMD be satisfied by losing or winning holdings such as ETF, stocks, or mutual funds, etc.? So should RMD be satisfied by losing or winning holdings such as ETF, stocks, mutual funds? So I think the question means, what would be better to take my RMD of, holdings that are losers or holdings that are winners? And it really depends on your situation, but it's a very good question if that's what you're asking. And that is, a lot of times it makes sense to satisfy the RMD from the losers. Why? Because you can do what's called an in-kind RMD. A lot of you don't know that. You don't have to take cash out of your portfolio. You can actually move one asset from your IRA into a non-IRA. You get a 1099 that satisfies your RMD, but you never sold anything. But let's say that you have an investment that's gone down in value. You expect it to come back. It just hasn't. And now all of a sudden you can take that and you can move it over to a non-IRA. And when it comes back in value, it's going to be outside of your IRA account. So it won't come back in value in your IRA account. So I think that's a very astute question. There's more to it than that, but generally it's not bad to transition losers. That's also a good time to do Roth conversions. Now, you cannot do a Roth conversion of your RMD, but if you have an investment that's gone down in value, you can actually do a conversion in kind. And while it's down in value, and then when it comes back in the Roth IRA, which means it's all tax free. So there are strategies, and it's a very astute point to wonder which is the best way to do it. So a lot of times, taking those losing investments and transferring them out to either satisfy an RMD or Roth conversion, that makes a lot of sense. What else? So we had a question. We're going to spend almost no time here because we don't have a lot of you in this situation. But the question is this: what is the current guidance on the rules of transferring a 529 account from one person to another? Not changing beneficiaries, but changing owners. So good question. Very easy answer. The answer is you can't do it. That's state by state, but in California, you can't just change the owner of a 529. Once you're the owner, you're stuck, with exceptions. If you go through a divorce, if you die, if there's a court order, then you can. But outside of that, you can't just voluntarily change the owner. You can change beneficiaries. So if you set up a 529 plan, you can change who's going to get the money. So if you have, niece number one, and she decides not to go to school, and you want it to go to your nephew number two, you can do all that. That's not a problem. But you can't change the owner of the plan. So 529s, for those of you that may not be familiar with it, are college funding plans. These are plans that you can put money into. You pay tax on the money that you put in. So I'm not a big fan of that. And it grows tax deferred. And if it's used for college, then all that money is essentially tax free. So it's not bad from that standpoint. And they just made some rules that actually made it a little bit better. The one thing I didn't like about it, and the reason I don't have any 529s planned, I've got other ways that I'm funding for my kids, is college education. I have a 12-year-old and a 4-year-old, so we're not far for our 12-year-old. But the reality is that I don't use 529s because they would allow you to have tax-free growth as long as it was used for college expense, but it counted against you when it came to financial aid. So like, what good is that? You get a big 529 plan. And if you're going to take it out to qualify for financial aid, you're going to have to pay tax on it. You're going to have to pay 10% penalty. It doesn't make sense. So I didn't like it. But just recently, they changed some of the rules on that too. Won't get into that, but they have made it actually more attractive. But the question here that allowed me to expand a little bit is that you can't change the owner of the plan. And I should also say there's income limits. You can only put $18,000 per year per person. You could do $90,000 up front if you want. And then there are maximum limits. I think it's a little over $500,000 that you could put maximum for one of your beneficiaries' plans. So hopefully that helped answer that question. What else? Let me read this question really quick. That's an easy question. I feel like I'm talking a million miles an hour, so I think it's called passion. I just love having these conversations. What else? What are the safest investments to preserve my principal while earning interest and dividends? So that's a pretty broad, open-ended question. I could spend a lot of time talking about that. And it also means, what do we mean by preserve the principal? We have to remember that when you're investing for income, other than an annuity, your principal is going to fluctuate, but the income is going to remain the same, right? That's it. So, you're still preserving your principal. Just because your principal fluctuates doesn't mean you're losing money. If your principal is fluctuated down, as long as you're living off the interest and dividends, it doesn't matter. And as a matter of fact, if you're living off your interest and dividends don't fluctuate down with your principal. You're getting the same interest and dividends as you were 2 or 3 years ago, regardless of the value of your account. So if you're living off your income and you're not cannibalizing your principal, it doesn't matter what the value of your account is. If you have a home and you're living off the rent of the home, it doesn't matter what the value of the home is, right? It matters how much income you're getting. And for those of you that are living off the income of your portfolio, you're essentially living off the rent that your portfolio is giving you. We're just calling it interest and dividends. But too many people look at that fluctuation like, oh my gosh, the account went down. It doesn't matter. Think about it this way. If you're eating the eggs, it doesn't matter the value of the chickens, right? Poultry could go up and down in price, but if you're living off the eggs, what's it matter? Doesn't matter. Same thing. Your portfolios are giving you eggs. Now, here's the catch. The catch is that if your portfolio drops in value, if the chickens drop in value and you're not eating all these eggs, you're using these eggs and you're buying more chickens, would you rather buy more chickens when the value of chickens has gone up or when the value of chickens has gone down? Down, right? So if your portfolio has gone down in value just based on how you're invested, but you're reinvesting that income, you're not living off of it, you're actually doing yourself a big favor. You're dollar cost averaging back in, you don't even know it. And when the portfolio comes back, you're going to come out smelling like a rose. Now, the challenge is we live in a microwave society. One of the news reports and commentators I was listening to today on the way home said something like business cycles today are much shorter than they've ever been. It is. Everything's happening at light speed. And we want results at light speed. You don't invest in the stock market for light speed. You don't invest in bonds or fixed income or annuities for light speed. We're investing you for the next 20, 30, 40 years of your life. We're not investing you for the next year or two. We have to remember that. And when you start looking at your portfolios, it didn't do great last year. It didn't do great the year before, last couple of years. I don't care, because you're getting your income, and we're not talking about the next couple of years. We're talking about the next 20 or 30 years of your life. And that's why we have you invested. And we're also talking about the peace of mind that I touched on a little bit earlier as well, too. So it's important to know that, even though your principal's fluctuating, doesn't mean your principal's not protected. Sometimes someone will come to us and say, I lost money. No, you didn't lose money. The value of your home just went down. Your rent's the same, but the value of your home just went down. It doesn't matter what the value of the home is. Doesn't matter what the value of your portfolio is if you're living off the rent. Doesn't matter the value of the chickens if you're living off the eggs. So I think that, hopefully that helps. Now, if we're talking about the safest investments, some of you might find this interesting. The safest investment known to mankind is what? It's a U.S. Treasury of any sort. U.S. Treasury, that's what's considered to be the safest investment known to mankind. After U.S. Treasury, you've got bank accounts, and you certainly have annuities in the mix as well, too. A lot of the annuities today will give you a lot more income than you can get otherwise. And if you're not interested in income, you don't need income, but you're looking for safety and you're looking for potential return. A lot of the index annuities out there today probably average over the next 9-10 years, probably 5 to 7%. 5 to 7%. Some of them are giving you bonuses. So those are some really safe investments as well, too. And I think I answered that question. So let's see. Number 11. So this is interesting. Very broad, open-ended question. I've got a few more. A lot of these are going to be very quick because I see we're running up. I'm going to try and see if we can finish in about the next 10 minutes. How about that? Good luck. How much do I need to retire comfortably in this economy? Broad, open-ended questions. But it gives me a chance to remind you that you retire on income. You retire not on assets. It doesn't matter what your assets are. It matters what your income is. Think about it this way. Imagine that I gave you $1 million piece of property. It's worth $1 million, but you couldn't sell it. And there was no building on it, so you couldn't rent it out. What good does it do for you? Zero. Didn't do anything, right? The reality is the farmland doesn't do a lot for your retirement. It's the crops that are going to do a lot for your retirement. You don't retire on assets, you retire on income. So how much do you need? That's a good question. What I know is this. You need enough income to be able to pay for your expenses and adjust for inflation and be prepared for those unexpected things that could come along later down the road, like inflation, like long-term care. So that's the broad answer to a broad question, but it's all about, it's not about how much do I need assets, it's how much do I need income to be able to retire comfortably. So a couple bullet points. What else? I'm going to skip that question. I know now that I said it, you're like, what's that question? So it was a question there's a question. Is Congress coming after the equity in my home? So I'm going to suggest no. And there's been several variations of that question. It was that Congress is coming after my 401k, and usually what it is, it's usually offered by someone who is spending millions of dollars a month in advertising and also collecting millions of dollars a month in selling. I don't want to use the word fake news, overused, but it fake news. There's an individual out there. Some of you have heard of him. I'm not going to name the name. I don't know where this recording is going to go, so I'm not going to name names. But there's one particular individual out there that was collecting, I want to say it was like $2 million a month in revenues. And he used to be a reporter. That's it. No financial experience at all. He used to be a reporter and realized that as a reporter, he could craft really good headlines. And if he crafted headlines, you get, something that is really catchy, really provocative, right? You craft a headline that everyone opens up and reads. Now all of a sudden you can make a lot of money when you develop those lists. And he was making, I want to say it was like $2 million a month in subscriptions. Now, and he quickly learned as a reporter that you don't make money selling subscriptions if everything is quiche and roses and fluffy and marshmallows and the good news doesn't sell. It's the bad news that sells. And so what they generally do is you'll hear things like the government's going to take my 401ks, the government's going to take my equity, the dollar is going where, right? The world's falling apart. And it's what they're generally doing. As I've read some of these things and I kind of sit back and laugh, things that are non-justifiable, things that no one's worried about, no one in the legit is talking about these things. But can we say that there's no truth? I think if you take a grain of sand, and they're pretty good with these headlines of taking a grain of sand and turning it into the entire beach. That's what they're doing. So it's not that there could be no truth. It's that no credible person is believing or going down the roads that they do, but they're doing it with the motivation of selling subscriptions. And that then involves bad news that you're not going to hear anyone else. And there's a reason you're not hearing it anywhere else, because it's not legit. So hopefully that helps give you that thought. But as far as I've heard, they're not coming for the equity in your home. Are my 403b accounts safe? Now, that's one question. Are my 403b accounts safe? It's going to give me an answer. It's going to give me a chance to just remind you of the question that we get along those lines a lot. The answer to the question is it depends. It depends on how your 403b is invested. A mistake that a lot of people make. We get a lot of our calls on our show about this from our radio show. And the question is, how do I invest or is my IRA safe? Is my 403b safe? Is my 401k safe? Can I lose money? Is it better? Is my IRA going to do better than my non-IRA? Questions like that. Well, what that tells me is that you don't understand how a 403b or IRA works. You can put investments that are inside a 403b. You can put those same investments outside a 403b or inside an IRA or inside a Roth IRA. It's not the 403b that's going to perform. It's the investments inside the 403b that are going to perform. If you have a mutual fund inside the 403b and it crashes, then your 403b is going to crash. If you have that same mutual fund inside a Roth IRA, it's going to crash. Your Roth IRA is going to crash. Your IRA is going to crash if the same mutual funds in your IRA, and so on and so on. It's not your 403b that's invested. Your 403b is just a tax shell. That's all it is. Your IRA is just a tax shell. You can put almost anything inside an IRA that you want. And the performance of your IRA is going to depend on what you put inside of it. You could put an annuity in an IRA, and then you're going to be safe. You could put a CD in an IRA. You could put a checking account in an IRA. Now, don't do that. A lot of negative things happen if you do that. You could put your home in an IRA. Again, negative things. You can put almost anything you want in an IRA. The performance of your 403b or IRA is dependent on what's in it. It's not just going to perform better or worse because it's an IRA or Roth IRA or 403b. So hopefully that helps as well. What else? Oh, here's a good question. If Donald Trump appoints a new Fed chair in 2026, what might happen? Well, good. And there's half a dozen people that are being considered at this point. They're all going to be doves for sure. He wants interest rates lower. What for sure is going to happen is they'll be a little more dovish than Jerome Powell, and interest rates will probably go down a little faster than they have been, assuming that they can do that. The problem the Fed is in is if they lower interest rates too much, even if Trump wants them to, that could cause inflation to spiral out of control. Remember earlier, we talked about inflation is sticky. It's not anywhere near where it should be. It's 50% higher than it should be at this point. And if you go back and you look at the first quarter of this year, it came down. The second quarter went up. Third quarter came down a little bit. It's been this seesaw of what's going on. And the problem is not that they just don't want to lower interest rates. The problem is that if they lower rates too fast, inflation could take off. And if they have to reverse course at this stage of the game and turn around and raise interest rates, oh my gosh. Earlier, we said that there's not anything rocky with the stock market that we see for the next 6 months or year. That would be a game changer right there. That would change the entire thing. And by the way, it could happen. A couple bad inflation reports could very well cause them to have to sidetrack, and that would not be good for the stock market. So hopefully that answers that question. What else? So we actually answered that question. So I'm reading a question. We answered it. So I'm going to skip, and we're only a few minutes away. So here's a good question. Should I get out of stock market altogether now that I'm in my 70s? The answer is probably not. Very rarely does it make sense to get out of the stock market completely. Most of you, as our clients, have some percentage of your portfolio in stocks. So probably doesn't make sense to get out completely, but it does depend on your situation. And the focus shouldn't necessarily be, should you have stocks or not? I think there's some of that. I don't want you having all of your portfolio in stocks and we have a major crash and you lose your shirt. That doesn't make sense. But again, I think the focus needs to be on income. If you have all the income you need, then you have more flexibility with whatever's left in your portfolio. And I think that's important to understand as well too. So the short answer is probably doesn't make sense to get out completely, but if you're concerned, maybe it makes sense to reduce your exposure to some degree. What else? How much cash on hand is needed at retirement? This is our second to last question. It depends on how you're invested. You might find that surprising, but that's the real answer. If you're invested for growth and you are selling principal to get your income, you need to have more cash than if you're living on your income. Why? If the market crashes for 2 years, 2 or 3 years, it's underwater and your portfolio is underwater. And by the way, there's been time periods of 10 years where portfolios are underwater. So it doesn't have to be 2 or 3. But if your portfolio is underwater for 2 or 3 years and you're cannibalizing your principal to get your income, you'd be smart to have 2 or 3 years of cash set aside, because now when your portfolio is down, you don't want to sell shares. Now you go to your cash. Now, some people make the mistake of thinking that I've got cash and I'm taking my withdrawals from my cash, so I'm not cannibalizing your principal. No, you are. If you have cash over here and you get this over here and you're not taking from here, but you're taking money out of your savings account, you're still cannibalizing your whole portfolio. So I don't want you to make the mistake that you're not. But if you're selling principal to get your income, you need to have a lot more cash, probably 2 or 3 years of cash set aside than if you were invested for income. If you're invested for income, like we teach at Providence Financial, you need a lot less cash. Why? Because you're living on your income. And you probably then don't need more than maybe 3 months of cash. You don't need a lot of cash if you're invested the right way. So it does depend on how you're invested, but I appreciate the question. And this is going to cap us off. As one nears retirement, should one be considering which areas to move one's money to? Okay, so maybe I should have read the question before asking it, but I think the answer is, if I'm going to retire, do I need to change course? And I think by now, with all the conversation we've had now, and the answer is yes, 100%. One of the biggest mistakes that I see people make, if I had to say there was one big mistake, and that is that they never make a paradigm shift from investing for the accumulation phase of life to investing for the distribution phase. And the strategies that work so well in the accumulation phase, those strategies can absolutely be deadly if used in the distribution phase of life. And it doesn't take a lot of common sense to realize that if you've got 20 or 30 years ahead of you and you're saving money and you've got time on your side and you're dollar cost averaging, and then you get to a point where you're retired and you're not saving money, you're making withdrawals from your portfolio, you're not putting money in, you're taking money out, and you've got 20 or 30 years without a paycheck, and now your portfolio has to last you 20 or 30 years in the rest of your life or more. It's not a stretch of the imagination to understand that those scenarios are different. Those strategies are different. But the biggest mistake I see people make is they never change strategies from the accumulation phase to the distribution phase. For the last dozen years, you've gotten away with it. Every year the market goes up, you'll get away with it because the market is outperforming. But the moment that the market turns, and it's not a matter of if, it's nothing goes up forever. The moment that we have another 2008 like scenario or another 2001 scenario, the moment that happens, you're going to find out whether or not you were invested properly or not. My biggest fear, if you ask me what my biggest fear, I think there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of baby boomers that are swimming naked, and we're not going to find out till the tide goes out. That's my fear. I don't want you to be 75 years old and keep doing the same thing since you were 65, feeling confident, feeling like you're okay, and the tide goes out in a big way, and all of a sudden what you thought was going to last you the rest of 30 years is gone. I lived through the 2001 tech crash. I lived through the 2008 financial crisis. I've seen it. I don't want you to be there. And that's my biggest fear. So the answer to the question is absolutely yes. When you retire, you should be making some changes. And really the focus shifts from accumulation to income, from putting money out, putting money in, to getting money out. The strategies are different. That being said, I want to offer those of you that are guests. First of all, I want to thank you for joining us, whether you're a Providence Financial family, a client of ours, or whether you're a guest or someone referred by a family. But for those of you that are guests, maybe we've never talked before, you've never talked with one of our advisors, but something we said makes sense. Maybe you're just starting to realize how complicated this whole retirement thing is. It's much harder than when you're working in this world and you're growing up. When you're in the accumulation phase of life, your money has one purpose: grow. That's it. Doesn't matter how you do it, grow. When you get into retirement, your money's got to protect you. It's got to pay for your income. It's got to pay for long-term care. It's got to adjust for inflation. Your money has lots of competing purposes. And that's where we help our clients with. The people that are attracted to Providence are people that are really confused about retirement, have a lot of questions about retirement, realize it's very expensive. Time is not on their side. They want to make sure they don't make a mistake, because they realize that one mistake can throw them completely off track. And our clients have the peace of mind to live retirement, knowing that they've got a plan in place. But if you don't, if you're here and this is, you've never contacted us, I'm going to give you the opportunity to have a quick intro call, complimentary, with one of our financial advisors. We've set some time aside for this group. Let me go ahead and enable that. You're going to see an offers pop up here. So it should say in the upper right corner of your screen. It should say offers. I'm going to add this offer here. And here we go. So you see it now on your screen. If you want to schedule a 30-minute call with one of our advisors, I'm making it free. We've blocked off some time over the course of, I think, the next week or so. Get on the phone, talk to one of our advisors, ask whatever questions that you have, and we'd love to meet you. Complimentary, no pressure at all. And I think it's important to say that we're not trying to get you as a client. The reality is that our focus is on trying to help you have the peace of mind that you deserve in retirement. And if you have a lot of confusion and you're not clear about things and you want someone to help you, and if we feel like we can help you, then great, we can work together. And if we don't feel like we can help you, or you don't feel like you want help, that's fine. Schedule that 30-minute call. We'll find out. So it's on your screen. If it's not on your screen, you can go ahead and click on the offers and you'll see it there. Certainly get on our calendar. I'm Anthony Sicaro. Thank you for joining us. Clients, thank you for your trust. Thank you for your friendship. Certainly hope this has been helpful. If you're not a client, certainly look forward to having you schedule a call. Have a great evening. And if we don't talk before Christmas, Merry Christmas. God bless.